The frozen wind of Chicago whipped relentlessly against my face as I stood outside the sapphire-tinted glass of the Obsidian Heights Pavilion on winter solstice. It had been precisely 7 years since I walked away from the heavy iron gates of my family's estate, leaving behind a legacy built on manipulation and the echoing words of a mother who claimed I would never survive the harsh realities of the business world. Clad in a modest navy coat from a second-hand boutique and gripping an unbranded leather clutch, I intentionally chose an ensemble that screamed ordinary to contrast against the diamonds blinding the guests inside. I needed to witness their unfiltered reactions tonight to determine if time had softened their arrogance, or if they still perceived me as an embarrassing stain on their pristine reputation. The security guard gave a curt nod as I approached the velvet ropes, his eyes sliding right past me without a single flicker of recognition. To the elite circle of the city's financial barons, Vivian Sterling was merely a ghost who had abandoned her inheritance to chase foolish pipe dreams in the tech underbelly of San Francisco. But as I pushed open the heavy glass doors, stepping into a grand atrium illuminated by cascading crystal fixtures and thick with the scent of imported white truffles, I carried a secret that would shatter their reality. Seamlessly weaving past waiters in tailored tuxedos serving vintage champagne, I felt the familiar opulence of my mother's tyrannical empire, where human souls were traded for corporate shares and real estate portfolios. The supervisor guided me through a labyrinth of private velvet-draped dining chambers until we reached the gilded double doors reserved for the Sterling family's annual winter banquet. Peering through the translucent glass panels, I watched the silhouettes of high society power players moving like chess pieces to the booming, absolute commands of Julianne Sterling. As the absolute matriarch of Sterling Global Assets, she had amassed billions by exploiting market vulnerabilities and maintaining a chilling conviction that her judgment was entirely infallible. Stepping into the room, my presence instantly severed the threads of ongoing conversation, causing the entire assembly to freeze in collective astonishment. My sister, Beatrice, sat paralyzed with a crystal goblet suspended mid-air, while my brother, Alastair, shifted uneasily by the fireplace as his face cycled through waves of shock and deeply buried guilt. At the absolute apex of the mahogany table sat Julianne, looking slightly weathered by the passage of time but possessing the same predatory, calculating gaze that evaluated everyone like assets on a balance sheet. "Vivian," she enunciated coldly, her voice mimicking the tone of a foreclosure notice, "I see you finally decided to crawl out of obscurity." Ignoring the sting of her greeting, I glided toward the isolated chair at the farthest end of the table, purposely positioned away from the warmth of the hearth. A sommelier hurried to fill my flute with expensive nectar, which I accepted merely for appearance while keeping my faculties entirely sharp for the confrontation ahead. The suffocating corporate dialogue resumed around me, filled with boasts of aggressive company mergers and hostile takeovers that treated people like collateral damage. Not a single person at that table inquired about my well-being during those 7 grueling years, treating me instead like an invisible piece of structural decor. Precisely halfway through the main course, Julianne placed her silver utensils down with absolute mathematical precision and locked her piercing gray eyes directly onto mine. "Tell me, Vivian, are you still wasting your life coding useless algorithms for pennies, or have you crawled back to beg for a real position?" she asked, her voice deliberately amplified to ensure every aristocrat in the room could savor my humiliation. I took a slow breath, maintaining absolute composure as I replied, "I am managing quite exceptionally, mother." Julianne let out a mocking laugh that rippled across the sycophants at the table, noting that mediocrity always masks itself behind the word exceptional when there are no tangible trophies to display. She boasted about her own early achievements, reminding everyone that by my age she had consolidated 3 major banking cartels and secured a seat on the Federal Trade Board. "And what exactly have you constructed in your cramped little world besides a mountain of debt and a collection of broken dreams?" she sneered, leaning back into her leather throne with an air of absolute triumph. The phantom weight of old insecurities tried to claw its way back into my chest, threatening to reduce me to the vulnerable 24-year-old who had been cast out of the family library for refusing to forge financial compliance reports. But I was no longer that frightened girl seeking validation from a court of wolves, so I looked her dead in the eye and stated that my current life was more than sufficient. Julianne shook her head in disgust, declaring to the room that the fundamental difference between the weak and the powerful was the ruthless ambition to conquer everything at any cost. "I extended this invitation tonight as an act of maternal charity, offering you one final opportunity to admit your monumental foolishness," Julianne remarked, swirling her crimson wine with a slow, hypnotic rhythm. She lamented that I had abandoned the dynasty for abstract concepts of decentralized ledger technology and artificial intelligence systems that she considered nothing more than digital toys. The silence in the banquet hall became absolute as every pair of eyes judged my cheap attire, silently celebrating the supreme authority of the matriarch putting her rebellious child in her place. Instead of shrinking away, a composed smile spread across my face, a subtle shift that caused Julianne's hand to falter slightly as an unfamiliar wave of uncertainty crossed her features. She remained completely oblivious, much like the rest of the oblivious wolves at the table, to the shadow empire I had quietly forged from the ashes of my banishment. They possessed absolutely no knowledge of the multi-billion-dollar sovereign tech fund I had engineered, nor the automated market protocols that now controlled the very liquidity her firm relied upon. They did not realize that billionaire financier Arthur Vance, whom Julianne had spent months desperately trying to court for an emergency bailout, was actually my primary capital partner and fully aware of my true identity. Tonight, the grand architect of sterling global assets would learn the definition of absolute corporate karma, and it would not happen behind closed doors. Lifting my glass, I took a single, deliberate sip of champagne to toast the incoming storm, knowing the cycle of retribution that began 7 years ago was about to conclude. I spent my formative years residing in a mansion that closely resembled a cold mausoleum, an imposing Gothic estate nestled on 20 acres of restricted land in Lake Forest, Illinois. The grand residence featured 32 cavernous rooms maintained by a revolving door of intimidated servants who operated under a strict code of absolute perfection. Julianne had commissioned the estate in the exact year of my birth, 1995, transforming a historic monument into a personal temple dedicated to her own supreme financial dominance. The property was engineered to project an illusion of absolute security and generational wealth, boasting imported marble columns and a geothermal fountain that defied the freezing Midwestern winters. Inside those walls, my childhood memories were forged entirely from a heavy, suffocating silence where family members walked on eggshells to avoid triggering our mother's wrath. Beatrice moved through the grand corridors like a well-trained actress, ensuring every social event flawlessly mirrored the high expectations of the city's elite class. Alastair, being the firstborn son, was instantly claimed by Julianne to become the crown prince of the asset empire, groomed from his toddler years to inherit the throne. I was treated as a redundant spare, an unplanned variable in Julianne's meticulously calculated life equation that she simply chose to ignore. The blatant favoritism was integrated so deeply into our daily existence that it became as routine as the ticking of the grandfather clock in the main hall. Alastair was gifted a luxury yacht for his Ivy League graduation, while my own academic milestones were met with a generic bank wire and a complete absence of maternal acknowledgement. My brother accompanied Julianne to high-stakes political summits and private banking retreats, learning the dark arts of corporate manipulation while I was locked away in the estate's private schoolhouse. The annual winter solstices were the most agonizing periods, as the estate transformed into a lavish playground for corrupt politicians and global financiers who traded favors beneath the mistletoe. Master chefs prepared extravagant banquets that could have easily sustained a small village for an entire year, while classical orchestras provided the soundtrack to their gluttony. I was strictly forbidden from entering the festivities, forced to watch the glittering spectacle from the shadows of the upper balustrade like a prisoner looking out a cell window. Beatrice would occasionally sneak a plate of truffles to my room later that evening, offering a hollow apology that served only to emphasize her own cowardice and complicity. School offered absolutely no sanctuary from the family shadow, as I was enrolled in the same ultra-exclusive preparatory academy where the sterling name opened every single door. While instructors constantly applauded Alastair's aggressive competitive drive, they openly ridiculed my absolute obsession with advanced predictive mathematics and fractal geometry. Julianne frequently intercepted my academic journals, viewing my fascination with complex data modeling as a completely useless deviation from traditional asset management. When I was 16, I developed an early machine learning prototype designed to identify systemic vulnerabilities within global banking systems, hoping it would finally win her respect. True power is wielded through compromised politicians and backroom handshakes, not through lines of code written by a child, she stated coldly, tossing my hard drive into the fireplace without a second thought. The sheer cruelty of that dismissal solidified something cold and unbreakable within my soul, ensuring I would never waste another breath seeking her validation. Beatrice occasionally offered soft words of comfort in the absence of our mother, but her affection lacked the necessary spine to ever challenge the family status quo. She valued her trust fund and her social standing far too much to ever raise a shield in my defense against Julianne's calculated tyranny. The subsequent years dissolved into a blur of systematic exclusion, forgotten birthdays, and lonely holidays spent plotting my eventual escape to the West Coast. By the time I secured a scholarship to Stanford, I had constructed emotional fortresses around my mind that no amount of psychological warfare could ever penetrate. Alastair attempted to maintain a superficial connection via email, sending patronizing updates about his corporate promotions while reminding me that the family doors would reopen if I apologized. I allowed them to believe I was struggling in obscurity, letting their collective arrogance blind them to the reality of the digital network I was quietly weaving across the global financial system. The definitive rupture that shattered our familial ties occurred on a stormy spring afternoon just weeks prior to my 24th birthday. Having just completed my doctorate in computational economics with highest honors, I foolishly returned to the Lake Forest estate under the illusion of a truce. Julianne sat behind her reinforced steel and glass desk, flanked by Alastair, while Beatrice nervously checked her reflection in the polished surface of the mahogany credenza. The air in the executive study carried the heavy scent of premium tobacco and unspoken threats, setting the stage for what was supposed to be my corporate sentencing. We are establishing a quantitative short-selling division to aggressively target emerging tech startups, and Alastair requires a technical director to execute his strategies, Julianne announced without offering a single word of welcome. She explained that I would be tasked with building the infrastructure for a predatory trading floor, operating completely under my brother's direct operational control. When I questioned whether I would have autonomous veto power over unethical short campaigns, Julianne's eyes narrowed into twin slits of absolute malice. Your sole function is to construct the weapon, while Alastair decides which targets to obliterate, she clarified, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I will not spend my life forging digital blades for my brother to plunge into the backs of innovative creators, I declared, my voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls. Julianne stood up slowly, her imposing posture radiating a terrifying energy that had broken seasoned CEOs throughout her multi-decade career. She reminded me that without the sterling name, my advanced degrees were nothing more than expensive pieces of paper destined to gather dust in a cubicle. Something magnificent broke inside me at that moment, replacing my lingering desire for family with a burning, absolute resolve to watch their empire burn to the ground. You believe your wealth makes you immortal, but you have failed to realize that the digital world does not bow to old dynasties, I stated calmly, turning my back on the family council forever. I packed my single suitcase and vanished into the California fog, spending the next 7 years building the financial technology powerhouse known today as Apex Citadel. Now, looking across this festive table at the arrogant faces of my relatives, I reached into my clutch and pulled out the legal foreclosure notices for Sterling Global Assets. As I placed the documents beside my mother's wine glass, I watched the color rapidly drain from her face as she realized her entire empire was now completely owned by the daughter she had cast away. Please subscribe to our channel and share this video with your friends and family. We create entertaining and inspiring stories for our viewers, and your support helps us continue making great content for you.